when Knox Ballantyne walked into the 42nd floor of Meridian Tower on a bitter Tuesday in January and found his senior financial analyst standing at the coffee station with her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug like it was the only warm thing she'd touched in hours. Something shifted behind his eyes. She didn't hear him come in. She was standing sideways to the door, shoulders curved inward, her dark wool coat still buttoned to the collar, pressing the mug against her palms with a kind of desperate stillness that had nothing to do with normal cold. Knox watched her for a moment from the doorway. Her fingertips were wrong. That was what his mind registered first. Not the coat still on, not the particular shape of her stillness. The fingertips gripping the mug were faintly bluish-gray at the tips, the skin waxy in a way that had nothing to do with the building's heating being slow on a cold morning. He'd seen that before, in a different context, a different city, a different life, but he recognized it. "Pelletier," he said. Iris Pelletier startled, sloshing coffee against the rim. She turned and smiled, the quick, reflexive smile she used with clients, not him. He'd been her employer for 2 years. He knew the difference. "Good morning, Mr. Ballantyne." Her voice was steady. She was good at that. "Sorry, I didn't hear you. I was just..." "How long were you outside?" A beat, almost imperceptible. "I'm sorry." "This morning. How long were you in the cold?" "Oh." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh meant to dismiss a thing before it could be examined too closely. "The subway was backed up. There was a delay at St. Andrew. I ended up walking partway." She lifted the mug a little. "I'm warming up. I'll have the Thornton projections on your desk by 10. Knox looked at her hands for one more second. Then he looked at her face, the careful neutrality of it, the absence of anything she didn't want him to see, and he nodded once. 10 is fine, he said, and walked into his office. He closed the door. He did not sit down. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the grey sprawl of downtown Toronto, Lake Ontario disappearing into low cloud at the horizon, and he thought about what he had just seen. He knew what early-stage frostbite looked like. He also knew that St. Andrew Station was a 7-minute walk from Meridian Tower. Even in a January wind, that was not enough time to purple a person's fingertips. He pressed the intercom. "Trace, come up." Iris Pelletier had worked at Ballantyne Capital for 2 years, and in those 2 years she had never once been late, never missed a deadline, and never given anyone a reason to look too closely. She was 31 years old, and she had spent a significant portion of those 31 years learning to take up as little space as possible. Not physically, she was a tall woman, generously built. With a full figure she had made a kind of peace with exactly once, and then lost peace with again every time Flynn opened his mouth about it. But spatially, professionally, emotionally. She had been hired at Ballantyne Capital because she was, without argument, the best analyst the firm had interviewed in 3 years. Her supervisor at the time had told her so directly, in the way that people deliver compliments that are also accidental confessions. "We almost didn't call you back, but then we looked at the numbers." She had smiled and said she was glad they had. What she hadn't said was that she knew exactly why they'd almost not called. She was 29, plus size, a woman, and she had come from a mid-level accounting firm in Mississauga rather than Bay Street. She didn't look like what people pictured when they pictured a Ballantyne Capital analyst. Flynn Asher had agreed with the people who pictured it that way. He was very open about that. "You know they only kept you because it looks good," he'd told her once pleasantly over dinner. "Optics, diverse hire, don't let it go to your head." She had stared at her plate and said nothing. That was 2 years ago, and she had since restructured 2 departmental portfolios, identified a derivatives exposure that saved the firm $11 million, and been quietly given a senior title and a raise that made Flynn furious in a different way. This morning, she had left the apartment with no transit card. It wasn't that she'd forgotten it. It was that, last night after the argument, After she'd told Flynn she couldn't lend him money again because she was still covering last month's shortfall, he had gone quiet in a way that was worse than shouting. He'd gone very still and very cold, and sometime while she was sleeping, he had gone through her bag. She'd found out at the turnstile. Card declined. She'd tried twice, the way you do when you know it's not going to work, but need a moment to absorb the fact. Then she'd put her wallet away and walked out into the January air. Flynn paid for the transit card. He insisted on it. He said it was easier if everything ran through his account. He said she was bad at managing money, this from a man who had spent the last 8 months slowly, methodically draining her savings account under the guise of joint household expenses. She hadn't been wearing proper gloves. She hadn't been able to find them. She'd searched the apartment twice in the dark, trying not to wake him, and finally settled for the thin knit pair stuffed in her coat pocket that were meant for October, not -15. She'd walked 40 minutes. She hadn't told anyone because there was nothing to tell. It was an argument. It was a transit card. It happened. She pressed the mug more firmly against her thawed-out fingers and went to finish the Thornton projections. At 4:30, Knox's assistant told Iris that Mr. Ballantyne wanted to see her. She gathered her notepad and went. Knox's corner office was imposing in the way of rooms designed to communicate something without saying it outright. Floor-to-ceiling glass, a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of dark walnut, a view of the city that made everything outside look smaller by contrast. Knox himself was not a man who wore his authority loudly. He was 43, broad-shouldered, with a face that people tended to describe as severe until they worked with him long enough to understand it was simply present. He was always paying attention. It was, depending on your circumstances, either reassuring or deeply unsettling. Iris had found it reassuring until today. He was not sitting at his desk. He was standing at the small oval table near the window, and on the table was food from a place she recognized. Sotto Voce, the Italian restaurant on King Street that she had walked past approximately 100 times and never gone into because the prices were architectural in their ambition. She stopped in the doorway. "Close the door," Knox said. She did. "Sit down. I have the Thornton follow-up to finish before." Iris. Just her name, nothing more. Quiet the way gravity was quiet. "Sit down." She sat. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat too, which wasn't something she'd expected. He served her without asking. A wide ceramic bowl of braised short ribs over soft polenta, a piece of crusty sourdough, a glass of sparkling water. Simple. Warm. The smell hit her in the chest like a small, unexpected blow. She looked at the food. She looked at him. "Mr. Ballantyne. You walked 40 minutes in January without proper gloves," he said. "I want to know why." The silence that followed had a shape to it. "I told you," she said carefully, "the subway. The TTC delay this morning was cleared by 7:43. You arrived at 8:22. He let that sit for a moment. Your transit card didn't work." She felt color move up the back of her neck. "I forgot to reload it." Knox looked at her with an expression that was not unkind and not fooled. "Eat something," he said instead of arguing. She almost said she shouldn't, almost said she was fine, almost recited from memory the things Flynn said about what happened to women who ate without accounting for it, said it the way he said everything, with the tone of someone delivering medical advice purely for her benefit. Instead, she picked up the fork. The first bite of polenta was warm all the way down. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch. They sat together in the quiet of the office as the city darkened outside the glass. Knox ate. She ate. He didn't push and he didn't pry, and he didn't look at her body with any of the particular brands of assessment she had grown accustomed to over the years. He looked at her the way he looked at things he was trying to understand, directly, with patience, with something careful held behind it. She reached for her water glass, and it shifted slightly under her fingers, still a little stiff, and she caught it before anything spilled, but not before Knox's eyes dropped to her hand. She saw him see it. The residual whiteness at the tips of 2 fingers, the slight unsteadiness she'd been managing all day. "How long," Knox said, his voice dropping by half a tone, "has he been doing this?" Her stomach clenched. Doing what? The card, the gloves, a pause, the other things. "I don't know what you're—" She stopped. She looked at the table. She looked at her hand. "It's not like that we argue. Everyone argues. Not everyone cancels their partner's transit card and hides their winter gloves. I lost the gloves I told you the card was. Iris, just her name, nothing else. The dam didn't break dramatically. It never did in real life. What happened was that her throat tightened in a very specific way. The tightening that came from trying to hold a version of events in place that she knew was not the true version. And she looked at the window because looking at him was too much, and she said, "It's fine, I have it handled. I've had it handled for 3 years. Silence. "You've been managing this for 3 years, Knox said. She didn't answer, which was also an answer. He was quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was measured in the way of something held very deliberately in check. "What is his name?" "Please don't." "What is his name, Iris?" "Mr. Ballantyne." She finally looked at him. His face was still, but his jaw was set in a way she hadn't seen before. "He's not. It's complicated. He has debts. He gets scared, and when he's scared, She stopped, heard herself. "It isn't usually like this." Knox said nothing. The silence did a particular kind of work. "It's usually like this," she said quietly to the table. Across the city that evening, in a parking structure beneath a hotel on Front Street, a man named Flynn Asher sat on the concrete with his back against a pillar and blood on his lip and absolutely no desire to test whether the 2 men standing on either side of him were bluffing. Knox Ballantyne stood in front of him, his jacket folded over his forearm, his expression the same as it was in boardrooms, entirely undisturbed. "I want to be clear about something," Knox said, his voice even. "I'm not here because I dislike you, Flynn. I don't know you well enough for that. I'm here because you have spent 3 years systematically dismantling a person I consider mine to protect. And that ends tonight." "She's my girlfriend," Flynn said, and even now, pinned against a concrete pillar, there was a petulance to his voice that Knox found more telling than anything. "You don't have the right to." "I have a file," Knox said, "compiled this afternoon. It includes your current balances, your outstanding debts, which are considerable, the dates and amounts of the transfers you arranged from Iris's savings account, and statements from 2 neighbors in the building on Bathurst and King." He paused. "One of them called police twice last year. The reports are in the file." Flynn went pale. "There is also a particular business associate in Etobicoke to whom you owe a significant sum. He has been patient. He will not remain patient." Knox reached into his breast pocket and set a plain white envelope on the ground in front of Flynn. "That covers your debt to him. The rest is enough to get you somewhere else and start over." Flynn stared at the envelope. "The condition," Knox said, "is that you leave. Not the neighborhood, not the city, the province. Tonight. You don't come back, you don't contact her, and you don't put her name in your mouth again." He looked down at Flynn with something that was not anger, and was therefore more frightening than anger. "Text her first. Tell her whatever you need, to tell her to give her a clean ending. I don't care what the words are. Just make sure she knows it's finished, and that it has nothing to do with her worth." Flynn's fingers shook as he reached for the phone. Iris was in a hotel suite on Wellington Street. Knox had arranged it. She hadn't argued because arguing required a kind of energy she didn't have left. Sitting on the edge of a large bed in a bathrobe softer than anything in her apartment, her fingers wrapped in warm cloths, her phone face up on the nightstand. It buzzed. "Flynn. I'm done. Found someone else. Don't try to reach me, we're over." She read it once, twice. She set the phone face down very still, and she waited. She waited for the collapse, for the grief to arrive, for the self-reproach to start, the familiar loop of you should have, you could have. Why didn't you? What did you do wrong? What is wrong with you? Nothing came. What came instead was so unexpected that she pressed her hand flat to her sternum and just breathed. It was quiet. Inside her chest, for the first time in 3 years, it was just quiet. The door clicked softly. Knox came in, having shed his jacket somewhere, looking like a man who had done a difficult thing and didn't intend to explain it. He carried 2 bottles of water and a small paper bag from the hotel cafe. He set them on the desk and then looked at her, reading whatever was on her face. "He texted," she said. Knox nodded once. "He said he found someone else." Her voice was level. "I don't think that's true." "It isn't." She looked at him. He held her gaze. "He's gone," Knox said. "He won't come back." He pulled the desk chair around so it sat nearer to her and sat. "How are your hands?" Such a small question, such an ordinary question. She looked down at the cloth-wrapped fingers and felt something behind her eyes she was not going to allow to become crying, not right now, not in front of him. "Better," she said. "Thank you for all of it. You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why did you then?" Knox was quiet in the way he was quiet when he was deciding something. "Because you have worked for this company for 2 years, and in that time you have made yourself indispensable and invisible in equal measure. You have never asked for anything. You have never made anything about yourself. And this morning you walked 40 minutes in negative 15 degrees rather than ask anyone for help." He looked at her steadily. "You were worth noticing before that. I should have said so sooner." Iris opened her mouth, closed it. "Get some sleep," he said and stood. "Your position at the firm is not contingent on anything that happened tonight. In any direction, you understand that?" "I do." "Good." He moved toward the door and stopped, not turning around. "For what it's worth, you're one of the 2 sharpest minds I've ever hired. The other one is 64 and retired in Portugal." A pause. "You are not a diversity optic, Iris. You're a reason this company still runs." He left. She sat in the quiet for a long time. Then she lay down, pulled the duvet up to her chin, and for the first time in what felt like years, she slept without listening for footsteps. 6 months passed. Toronto moved from January into a fragile spring, and then a warm green summer, and Iris Pelletier moved with it. She was still at Ballantyne Capital, still in the same role, but the role had expanded. She had a junior analyst now, and a corner window of her own, and a salary that reflected what she actually produced, rather than what a hiring committee had been willing to offer a woman from Mississauga with no Bay Street pedigree. Knox had restructured her contract in February without fanfare. He'd simply put the new terms in front of her and said, "This is what your work is worth." She'd signed without speaking, because speaking would have broken something she was trying to keep intact. She had also changed other things. She found an apartment of her own, a real one, with a lease in her name, on Roncesvalles, with tall windows and a clawfoot tub. She bought herself a proper pair of winter gloves and put them somewhere only she knew. She started, slowly and without pressure, to eat what she wanted without cataloguing it in the way Flynn had trained her to, and she bought 2 blazers in jewel tones that fit her the way good clothes were supposed to fit, not hiding anything, just being worn. She had not lost a single pound she had no desire to. She thought sometimes about the dinner in Knox's office, about what he had said. She thought about it in the way you think about something that rearranged something inside you without asking permission. Their dynamic at work had shifted into something she didn't have an exact word for, professional still, precise and respectful as it had always been. But there were late evenings now when the floor emptied out, and they would find themselves at the table in his office, going over acquisition data, their elbows nearly touching over the same documents. And the air in the room would do something particular, that neither of them acknowledged. She had decided to leave it alone. She was newly free. She was still learning what that meant. And then it was a Wednesday in August, and Flynn Asher came back. She was cutting through the parking structure adjacent to the building, a shortcut on rainy days to the food court where she picked up lunch, when she heard his voice. Pelletier. She stopped. He stepped out from between two parked cars. He looked like 6 months of bad decisions, thinner, unkempt, his eyes carrying the specific calculation of someone who had gambled badly and was now trying to bluff his way through the hand. Flynn, she kept her voice flat. You look good, he said, with the particular edge he wore when something had changed without his permission. Expensive. The job treating you well. It is. What do you want? He stepped closer. She didn't step back. I've been thinking, he said, about what you told me, about Ballantyne, about the firm, things I've heard. He tilted his head. That operation doesn't run exactly clean, does it? Offshore routing, regulatory grey zones. He smiled with no warmth in it. I want $500,000. Wire it to an account I'll provide. You convince your boss. Or I make some calls, some journalists, some people at the OSC, and suddenly Ballantyne Capital has a very interesting story written about it. She looked at him. She had spent 3 years shrinking from this man, 3 years making herself quieter and smaller and more careful, trying to reduce herself to a size his insecurity could accommodate. She looked at him now and felt primarily tired of him, in the specific and comprehensive way of someone who has finally fully recovered from an illness and can look at the thing that made her sick without flinching. You really are stupid, Flynn, she said. His face changed. What did you just? You're going to threaten Knox Ballantyne, she said. You with your OSC tip and your journalists. She let the pause do its work. You should go, right now. A sound behind her. Footsteps, unhurried from the direction of the elevator. Knox came to stand beside her. He was in his shirt sleeves. She had interrupted something, clearly, and he had 2 men with him whose names she didn't know, but whose presence she understood completely. He didn't look at Flynn with fury. He looked at him with something much quieter, and therefore much worse. Mr. Asher, Knox said, we've met once before. You don't remember it, which was intentional. I'm going to assume this visit is the result of poor judgment, compounded by worse circumstances, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds to walk back to wherever you've come from before my associate begins a more detailed conversation with you about the nature of extortion in this province. Flynn looked at Iris. His eyes were doing the thing they'd always done when he'd been caught. That rapid recalculation, looking for a way to reframe, to put her back on the defensive. She looked back at him with absolutely nothing. She thought about every meal she'd eaten standing at the kitchen counter so she wouldn't slow him down, every purchase she'd hidden in a bag at the back of the closet. Every morning she'd stood in front of the mirror and heard his voice instead of seeing her own face. She thought about January and the gloves she couldn't find and 40 minutes in the cold. You thought I took up too much space, she said. Her voice was very calm. You thought if you made everything around me small enough, I'd become small too. She tilted her head slightly. You were wrong about what I was. You were wrong about what I was worth. She held his gaze one final time, not with anger, just with the clean finality of a closed door. You're a chapter that's already over, Flynn. I have other things to do. She turned and walked toward the elevator. Behind her, she heard Knox's voice say something low and brief, and then the sound of the stairwell door opening and closing. Knox caught up to her in the elevator lobby. He pressed the call button, and they stood beside each other in the particular silence that had its own texture by now. Are you all right? He said. Yes, a pause. No, I mean, she exhaled. Yes, I think so. The elevator arrived. They stepped in. The doors closed. He won't try again, Knox said. I know. She looked at her reflection in the brushed steel of the doors. She looked different than she had in January. She was wearing the green blazer. the jewel-toned one she'd bought herself, and her hair was loose, and she looked like someone who had made a decision about herself and written it somewhere permanent. "I know you'll make sure of it." He was looking at her reflection, too. The elevator slowed between floors, not a full stop, just the small mechanical hesitation old buildings made. In that half-second of suspension, Knox turned. Iris. She turned, too. He looked at her the way he had looked at the situation in January, like someone who had been patient long enough and had decided patience had finished its job. "I've been," he said, professionally restrained for approximately 6 months. She felt something complicated move through her chest. "I noticed." "I didn't want to push." He stopped, started again, which was unusual for him. "You had just come out of something. You needed time that had nothing to do with me." "I know." She did know. It was one of the things she had tried not to examine too directly. Knox. Just his name. In the elevator, in the pause between floors, something in his expression shifted, opened. "You told me," she said, "that I was worth noticing before any of this." She held his gaze. "I've been trying to figure out if I believe that yet." "Do you?" She thought about the blazer, about the apartment on Roncesvalles, about eating without counting, about standing in that parking structure and feeling nothing toward Flynn Asher except finished. "I'm getting there," she said. The elevator resumed its upward motion. Knox reached over and carefully took her hand, the one that had been frostbitten in January, the fingers that had been purple at the tips. He held it between both of his for a moment. Not a gesture toward anything, just something steady. "Take as long as you need," he said. "I'll be here." The doors opened onto the 42nd floor. The city stretched gold and green below the windows, Lake Ontario a flat mirror under August sun. Iris Pelletier walked back to her office with her head up, her green blazer catching the light, and for the first time in longer than she could name, she was not waiting for anything to go wrong. She was just here, taking up exactly as much space as she was owed. That, it turned out, was enough to begin with.